Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, What is to be done? Burning questions of our movement. Appendix. Footnote 8. The attempt to unite Iskra with Rabocheye Dyelo. It remains for us to describe the tactics adopted and consistently pursued by Iskra in its organizational relations with Rabocheye Dyelo. These tactics were fully expressed in Iskra, number 1, in the article entitled The Split in the Union of Russian Social Democrats Abroad. Footnote 1. From the outset we adopted the point of view that the real union of Russian Social Democrats abroad, which at the first Congress of our party was recognized as its representative abroad, had split into two organizations, that the question of the party's representation remained an open one, having been settled only temporarily and conditionally by the election, at the International Congress in Paris, of two members to represent Russia on the International Socialist Bureau, 9-1 from each of the two sections of the divided Union abroad. We declared the fundamentally Rabocheye Dyelo was wrong. In principle we emphatically took the side of the emancipation of labor group, at the same time refusing to enter into the details of the split and noting the services rendered by the Union abroad in the sphere of purely practical work. Footnote 2. Consequently, ours was, to a certain extent, the waiting policy. We made a concession to the opinions prevailing among the majority of the Russian Social Democrats that the most determined opponents of economism could work hand in hand with the Union abroad because it had repeatedly declared its agreement in principle with the emancipation of labor group, without, allegedly, taking an independent position on fundamental questions of theory and tactics. The correctness of our position was indirectly proved by the fact that almost simultaneously with the appearance of the first issue of Iskra December 1903 members separated from the Union, formed the so-called Initiators Group, and offered their services 1 to the foreign section of the Iskra organization, 2 to the Revolutionary Social Democrat organization, and 3 to the Union abroad, as mediators in negotiations for reconciliation. The first two organizations at once announced their agreement, the third turned down the offer. True, when a speaker related these facts at the Unity Conference last year, a member of the Administrative Committee of the Union abroad declared the rejection of the offer to have been due entirely to the fact that the Union abroad was dissatisfied with the composition of the Initiators Group. While I consider it my duty to cite this explanation, I cannot, however, refrain from observing that it is an unsatisfactory one, for, knowing that two organizations had agreed to enter into negotiations, the Union abroad could have approached them through another intermediary or directly. In the spring of 1901 both Soryan No. April 1 and Iskra No. May 4 Footnote 3 entered into open polemics with Rabocheye Dyelo. Iskra particularly attacked the article The Historic Turn in Rabocheye Dyelo, which, in its April supplement, that is, after the spring events, revealed instability on the question of terror and the calls for blood, with which many had been carried away at the time. Notwithstanding the polemics, the Union abroad agreed to resume negotiations for reconciliation through the instrumentality of a new group of conciliators. A preliminary conference of representatives of the three-sided organizations, held in June, framed a draft agreement on the basis of a very detailed accord on principles, which the Union abroad published in the pamphlet to conferences, and the League abroad in the pamphlet documents of the Unity Conference. The contents of this accord on principles more frequently named the resolutions of the June Conference make it perfectly clear that we put forward as an absolute condition for unity the most emphatic repudiation of any and every manifestation of opportunism generally, and of Russian opportunism in particular. Paragraph 1 reads: We repudiate all attempts to introduce opportunism into the proletarian class struggle, attempts that have found expression in the so-called economism, Bernsteinism, militarism, etc. The sphere of social democratic activities includes ideological struggle against all opponents of revolutionary Marxism. For c. In every sphere of organizational and agitational activities, social democracy must never for a moment forget that the immediate task of the Russian proletariat is the overthrow of the autocracy. 5. 8. Agitation not only on the basis of the everyday struggle between wage labor and capital. 5. B. We do not recognize the stage of purely economic struggle and of struggle for partial political demands. 5. C. We consider it important for the movement to criticize tendencies that make the principle of the elementariness and narrowness of the lower forms soft movement. 5. D. Even a complete outsider, having read these resolutions at all attentively, will have realized from their very formulations that they are directed against people who were opportunists and economists, who, even for a moment, forgot the task of overthrowing the autocracy, who recognized the theory of stages, who elevated narrowness to a principle, etc. Anyone who has the least acquaintance with the polemics conducted by the Emancipation of Labor Group, Dyelo and Iskra against Rabocheye Dyelo cannot doubt for a single moment that these resolutions repudiate, point by point, the very errors into which Rabocheye Dyelo strayed. Hence, when a member of the Union abroad declared at the Unity Conference that the articles in number 10 of Rabocheye Dyelo had been prompted, not by a new historic turn on the part of the Union abroad, but by the excessive abstractness of the resolution, footnote for the assertion, was justly ridiculed by one of the speakers. Far from being abstract, he said, the resolutions were incredibly concrete. One could see at a glance that they were trying to catch somebody. This remark occasioned a characteristic incident at the conference. On the one hand, Khrushchevsky, seizing upon the word catch in the belief that this was a slip of the tongue which betrayed our evil intentions to set a trap, pathetically exclaimed, "Whom are they out to catch?" "Whom indeed?" rejoined Plekhanov sarcastically. "Let me come to the aid of Comrade Plekhanov's lack of perspicacity," replied Khrushchevsky. "Let me explain to him that the trap was set for the editorial board of Rabocheye Dyelo." General laughter, but we have not allowed ourselves to be caught. A remark from the left: all the worse for you. On the other hand, a member of the board, a group of conciliators, opposing the amendments of the Union abroad to the resolutions and desiring to defend our speaker, declared that obviously the word catch was dropped by chance in the heat of polemics. For my part, I think the speaker responsible for uttering the word will hardly be pleased with this defense. I think the words trying to catch somebody were true words spoken in jest. We have always accused Rabocheye Dyelo of instability and vacillation, and, naturally, we had to try to catch it in order to put a stop to the vacillation. There is not the slightest suggestion of evil intent in this, for we were discussing instability of principles and we succeeded in catching the Union abroad in such comradely manner. Footnote 5 that Khrushchevsky himself and one other member of the Administrative Committee of the Union signed the June resolutions. The articles in Rabocheye Dyelo, number 10. Our comrades saw the issue for the first time when they arrived at the conference, a few days before the meeting started. Clearly showed that a new turn had taken place in the Union abroad in the period between the summer and the autumn. The economists had once more gained the upper hand, and the editorial board, which veered with every wind, again set out to defend the most pronounced Barysterians and freedom of criticism, to defend spontaneity, and through the lips of Marxism to preach the theory of restricting the sphere of our political influence for the alleged purpose of rendering this influence more complex. Once again Parhu's apt observation that it is difficult to catch an opportunist with a formula has been proved correct. An opportunist will readily put his name to any formula and as readily abandon it, because opportunism means precisely a lack of definite and firm principles. Today, the opportunists have repudiated all attempts to introduce opportunism, repudiated all narrowness, solemnly promised never for a moment to forget about the task of overthrowing the autocracy and to carry on agitation not only on the basis of the everyday struggle between wage labor and capital, etc., etc. But tomorrow they will change their form of expression and revert to their old tricks on the pretext of defending spontaneity and the forward march of the drab everyday struggle, of ecstatic demands promising palpable results, etc. By continuing to assert that in the Articles in Number 10 the Union abroad did not and does not now see any heretical departure from the general principles of the draft adopted at the Conference to Conferences, page 26, the Union abroad merely reveals a complete lack of ability, or of desire, to understand the essential points of the disagreements. After the 10th issue of Rabocheye Dyelo, we could make one effort open the general discussion in order to ascertain whether all the members of the Union abroad agreed with the articles and with the editorial board. The Union abroad is particularly displeased with us because of this and accuses us of trying to sow discord in its ranks, of interfering in other people's business, etc. These accusations obviously unfounded, since with an elected editorial board that veers with every wind, however light, everything depends upon the direction of the wind, and we defined the direction at private meetings at which no one was present, except members of the organizations intending to unite. The amendments to the June resolutions submitted in the name of the Union abroad have removed the last shadow of hope of arriving at agreement. The amendments are documentary evidence of the new turn towards economism and of the fact that the majority of the Union members are in agreement with Rabocheye Dyelo. Note 10. It was moved to delete the words so-called economism from the reference to manifestations of opportunism on the plea that the meaning of these words was vague. But if that were so, all that was required was a more precise definition of the nature of the widespread error. And to delete militantrism, although Krzyzewski had defended it in Rabocheye Dyelo, number 2-3, pages 83-84, and still more openly in Vorwort's footnote 6. Notwithstanding the fact that the June resolutions definitely indicated that the task of social democracy is to guide every manifestation of the proletarian struggle against all forms of political, economic, and social oppression, thereby calling for the introduction of system and unity in all these manifestations of the struggle, the Union abroad added the wholly superfluous words that the economic struggle is a powerful stimulus to the mass movement taken by itself. This assertion cannot be disputed, but with the existence of narrow economism it could not but give occasion for false interpretations. Moreover, even the direct constriction of politics was suggested for the June resolutions, both by the deletion of the words "not for a moment to forget the aim of overthrowing the autocracy" and by the addition of the words "the economic struggle is the most widely applicable means of drawing the masses into active political struggle." Naturally, upon the submission of such amendments, the speakers on our side refused, one after another, to take the floor, considering it hopeless to continue negotiations with people who were again turning towards economism and were striving to secure for themselves freedom to vacillate. It was precisely the preservation of the independent features and the autonomy of Rabocheye Dyelo, considered by the Union to be the sine qua non of the durability of our future agreement, that is regarded as the stumbling block to agreement to conferences. Page 25. This is most inexact. We never had any designs against Rabocheye Dyelo's autonomy. Footnote 7. We did indeed absolutely refuse to recognize the independence of its features, if by independent features is meant independence on questions of principle and theory and tactics. The June resolutions contain an utter repudiation of such independence of features, because, in practice, such independence of features has always meant, as we have pointed out, all manner of vacillations fostering the disunity which prevails among us and which is intolerable from the party point of view. Rabocheye Dyelo's articles in its 10th issue, together with its amendments, clearly revealed its desire to preserve this kind of independence of features, and such a desire naturally and inevitably led to a rupture and a declaration of war. But all of us were ready to recognize Rabocheye Dyelo's independence of features in the sense that it should concentrate on definite literary functions. The proper distribution of these functions naturally called for 1. The theoretical magazine, 2. A political newspaper, and 3. Popular collections of articles and popular pamphlets. Only by agreeing to such a distribution of functions would Rabocheye Dyelo have proved that it sincerely desired to abandon once and for all its errors, against which the June resolutions were directed. Only such a distribution of functions would have removed all possibility of friction, effectively guaranteed a durable agreement, and, at the same time, served as a basis for a revival and for new successes of our movement. At present not a single Russian Social Democrat can have any doubts that the final rupture between the revolutionary and the opportunist tendencies was caused, not by any organizational circumstances, but by the desire of the opportunists to consolidate the independent features of opportunism and to continue to cause confusion of mind by the disquisitions of the Krzyzewskis and Martinovs. Notes 1. Collected Works, Volume 4, pages 378-79. Education on Lenin. Into our judgment of the split was based, not only upon the study of the literature on the subject, but also on information gathered abroad by several members of our organization. Lenin. 3. Collected Works, Volume 4, pages 13-20. For education on Lenin. 4. This assertion is repeated in 2 conferences. Page 25. Lenin. 5. Precisely in the introduction to the June resolutions we said that Russian social democracy as a whole always stood by the principles of the emancipation of labor group and that the particular service of the Union abroad was its publishing and organizing activity. In other words, we expressed our complete readiness to forget the past and to recognize the usefulness for the cause of the work of our comrades of the Union abroad, provided it completely ceased the vacillation we tried to catch. Any impartial person reading the June resolutions will only thus interpret them. If the Union abroad, after having caused a split by its new turn towards economism in its articles in number 10 and in the amendments, now solemnly charges us with untruth to conferences, page 30, because of what we said about its services, then, of course, such an accusation can only evoke a smile. Lenin. 6. The polemic on the subject started in Vorwärts between its present editor, Kautsky, and the editorial board of Zurian. We shall not fail to acquaint the Russian reader with this controversy. 10. Lenin. 7. That is, if the editorial consultations in connection with the establishment of a joint Supreme Council of the combined organizations are not to be regarded as a restriction of autonomy. But in June Rabocheye Dyelo agreed to this. Lenin. 8. Lenin omitted this appendix when What is to be Done was republished in the collection 12 Years in 1907. Page 521. 9. The International Socialist Bureau, the executive body of the Second International, established by decision of the Paris Congress in 1900. From 1905 onwards Lenin was a member of the Bureau as a representative of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. 10. Iskra, numbered March 18, 1902, published in the section from the party an item entitled Soryansko-Latnik with Vorwärts, summing up the controversy, correction to What is to be Done, the initiators group of whom I speak in the pamphlet What is to be done, page 141, see present volume, page 521-22, edition, have asked me to make the following correction to my description of the part they played in the attempt to reconcile the social democratic organizations abroad. Of the three members of this group, only one left the Union abroad at the end of 1900, the others left in 1901. Only after becoming convinced that it was impossible to obtain the Union's consent to a conference with the Iskra organization abroad and the Revolutionary Social Democrat organization, which the initiators group had proposed. The Administrative Committee of the Union abroad at first rejected this proposal, contending that the persons comprising the initiators group were not competent to act as mediators, and it expressed the desire to enter into direct contact with the Iskra organization abroad. Soon thereafter, however, the Administrative Committee of the Union abroad informed the initiators group that following the appearance of the first number of Iskra containing the report of the split in the Union, it had altered its decision and no longer desired to maintain relations with Iskra. After this, how can one explain the statement made by a member of the Administrative Committee of the Union abroad that the latter's rejection of a conference was called forth entirely by its dissatisfaction with the composition of the initiators group? It is true that it is equally difficult to explain why the Administrative Committee of the Union abroad agreed to a conference in June of last year, still remained in force, and Iskra's negative attitude to the Union abroad was still more strongly expressed in the first issue of Zurian, and in number 4 of Iskra, both of which appeared prior to the June conference. And Lenin Iskra, number April 19, 1902, published according to the Iskra text.